Hello, it's Maggie here in my wee back garden, my back court as they call it in Glasgow. I'll have a wee quick look. And feeling a bit pensive today. It would have been my mother's 100th birthday tomorrow, and certainly tomorrow we'll have a wee swally, as they say in Glasgow, down here in the back court. For anyone who drops by, social distancing, lots of space here, and certainly the neighbours will be coming and going, and Zach will be here in the evening for a wee tune because it's his great-grandmother's 100th birthday tomorrow. He never met her. She died just the year before he was born. That's right. So, but today I need to focus on her mum, my Nana. And yesterday I looked up some of her records and found that she was married on the 25th of June, 1917. And by the time she had my mum on the 17th of June, 1920, she already had 3 children. I think probably my Uncle Alfie, her firstborn, was maybe well on the way, certainly in attendance when she was married in St Mary's Cathedral in Edinburgh, to quite a wayward sailor in the Merchant Navy, my granddad. And then they went to Shetland, where he was posted, and had twin boys, both of whom had very tragic lives, actually. And some of it's covered in my book, Dying Embers and Shooting Stars, if you're interested. Anyway, my mum was born not more than 3 years after they were married, and she was their 4th child. And my Nana was all of 21 years old. Change days. And strangely, a lot of things are coming up on my Old Edinburgh website all about the Lawn Market. Now, the Lawn Market, if you know Edinburgh at all, is at the top of the High Street. And many of you may know the pub Deacon Brodie's, but rather. And my mother was born in the flat above that, not immediately, the 2 up from that. And the entrance was at the side, 20 Bank Street. There's another 20 there. 20 Bank Street was the entrance. And of course she spent her childhood in Lady Stairs Close at the back. That was where she was brought up and played, and was there until her late teens when they moved house to Prestonfield. So anyway, it's my Nana that I want to focus on today because, you know, as a young woman of 21 today, she was probably getting the early pangs of labour. She would know that by her third pregnancy anyway. And, you know, she had 3 wee boys, all under the age of 3. And living in quite a slummy area, I think, at the time, the Lawn Market. I do have photographs, actually, black and white photographs of her mother, my Nana's mother, Mary Ann Kelly, sitting on the steps, which are still there in the Lawn Market, or the pavement to step down to the road, and she was selling her fish. She was a Haddington fishwife, where the thumb comes from, you see, gutting the fish. And I'm not sure about the timing of that. It's an Edinburgh Evening News, a black and white photograph, probably if I was in Edinburgh today, which I might have been if it hadn't been for the lockdown. I would have been doing a wee bit of research into that, and certainly sitting on those steps, which was their wee pitch for selling fish, and looking over at where my mother was born, at home, obviously, very little services for women those days. Women helped women. And no doubt my great-grandmother, Mary Ann Kelly, was there at the birth, which is what happened in those days. So I'm thinking of that young woman, my Nana, and the part she played in my life, the first 5 years of my life, where she was my mother in many ways. When I was born during the war in 1943, my mother was working in the munitions, making bombs. Interesting. But my first 5 years, especially after the war finished in 1945, when memories are certainly very vivid, perhaps explain why I genuinely live by this rule of Celtic hospitality. You welcome in the stranger and you make a friend. Because those first 5 years were just absolutely enchanting ones for a child. The only protein that we had, as I remember, were pig's trotters. God, I love them. Oh, tripe. And at the weekend, my granddad would go down to the shore and pick up mussels and cockles and mussels, and occasionally a crab. My favourite was a crab, getting into the legs with a pin. But above all, my Nana's table was surrounded by young men, some of them in uniform, who'd come to court my then teenage aunts, Auntie Betty, Auntie Emily. They'd be 17, 19 at the time. And I shared a bed with them, a bed settee that came down at night time, and they were at the top and I was at the bottom. I was surrounded by feet as a child for the first 5 years. But that living room was where during the day the table would come out, both end leaves would be brought out, and that was the centre part of the table. My granddad would be working at one end, mending shoes. God, I can smell the leather and the glue even now as I talk about it. And my Nana would be cooking, although even then my memories of her was she wasn't well. She would always cough, very bad cough. I could hear it. Heavy smoker, but sometimes it wasn't tobacco. I forget what they were smoking. I don't think it was marijuana, but I think it was a herbally thing. Somebody prescribed this to her, but I didn't like the smell of it. It was horrible. It's funny how when you remember things, it's smells that are evoked too. Anyway, these uniformed young men, mainly Polish at that time, would come and ask my Nana's permission to walk with Emily or walk with Betty, and they were given permission as long as I was taken along. And I was obviously there as my grandmother's eyes and ears, and had to report back. Well, was I with them all the time? When I think of it now. But my favourite, he had a strange uniform. It was dark grey, I seem to remember, always very dirty. But his name was Pau. I remember his name was Pau. I was starting to read at age 4 or 5. And I knew his name was Pau because that was written on the back of his overalls, P-O-W, in big yellow letters. Pau. And he would come 2 or 3 times a week with this double barrel, square sort of barrow thing to collect the pig swill. And you kept all your tatty peelings and your vegetable stuff, and these were taken away to, now I understand, a prisoner of war camp. Didn't know that at the time though, and fed to pigs or what have you. And on one occasion I was running and I fell, and I have the mark, I'll show you to this day. Hold on a minute. There is a scar there on my knee, and I fell and went into a broken bottle, Clearburn Crescent. Can remember the pain to this day, and screaming, but a couple of 100 yards away from my Nana's house, where children just ran free in those days, And it was Pau who came running along and picked me up and took me into my Nana's house. I was bleeding profusely. And my nana was a very small woman. She was only about probably just over 5 foot, 5'1", 2 maximum if she stood up straight, but she was always quite bent and not strong, and this persistent cough all the time. So it was Pow who carried me along Clearburn Crescent to the number 2 bus stop, and we got on the bus and went up to the Deaconess Hospital. I can remember it, in Edinburgh. I can still smell whatever they were putting into me. And it was Pow who held my shoulders down as they stitched my leg. And I remember them spraying him as well with whatever the smelly stuff was. And my nana was sitting outside this room, coughing. They wouldn't let her in to help me. And I remember sleeping on his knee on the bus on the way back. He didn't smell very good either, pig swill, but I was just so exhausted. I can still smell that pig swill and Dettol combination. And we got home, and of course he was in big trouble because it was assumed that he had tried to escape. And when we got there, there was this army truck thing with military police. And they immediately put him into handcuffs, and my grandmother was explaining to them what had happened, and I was crying and I was hanging on to him going, "Pow, you leave my Pow alone." Probably my first violent direct action. I remember pounding this sergeant's knees and going, "You leave my Pow alone, that's my Pow," And he eventually, the sergeant, got down to my level and he says, "Right, Margaret, tell me what happened, you see." And I showed him my very sore knee. And so he gave me a sweetie. It was a sort of cough sweetie thing, but it was a sweetie. And said something to my grandmother. And eventually Pow was let off. They took the handcuffs off him. I ran into his arms again. And then he explained to me what Pow meant, and because I didn't understand. I was only 4 or 5, and he said that Pow was a prisoner. He was a German. He was a baddie, and I remember being so, even at the age of 5, how could anybody call Pow a baddie? He was my Pow. Anyway, after that, I used to look at him and wonder, and he used to look at me strangely as well. I think he'd obviously got into trouble for befriending this family, for being so intimate, because after that, anytime I'd approach him, he'd go, "No, Margaret, you stay, you stay." I don't know what the story was after that. But anyway, that sense of hospitality was generated by my nana, welcoming in the stranger. And I remember someone saying when she was made this big pot of something and sharing it with these lads, and she said, "Oh, well, Alfie," that was my oldest son, my oldest uncle, her firstborn son, he was in Italy at that time. I didn't see him until about 4 or 5. And I remember him coming back in uniform and speaking Italian. But I remember her answer, "Well, I hope someone's doing the same to my laddie." And that sunk in. It just took root. I was only 5. But sometimes in life, these seeds are sown, And that one, I'd like to think, bore fruit over the years. And any time I take someone in, either into my own house or most often just the refugees and asylum seekers downstairs. Lovely guy there just now, John from Gambia. He'll be helping me tomorrow, hopefully. I just see Pow. I just see a young man away from home for whatever reason. I think Pow must have been 18, 19. He was very young, very young. And they're all my Pows. I think I'm going to get a bit weepy, which I don't allow many people to see, so I'm probably going to wind this up quite soon. But remembering my nana, age 21, 3 children, possibly in labour today, 100 years ago, in the lawn market of Edinburgh. contemplating yet another child to feed while my granddad was very often away. Apparently, the family story is that he had another family in South America somewhere. That's in the closets. I was very much brought up in the ethos of there's things we don't speak about in our family. And again, you'll find that in the book and the havoc that that sort of attitude causes. But that was one of them. And every now and again, as a childhood, the only place I had to play was under the table, literally surrounded by feet. But I had my toys under there, a teddy bear my dad had brought home from the war, my koala bear, still have it. And I'd sit under there and listen, as you do. No television, no radio. And you listened. And I picked up a lot. Maybe there's another book there. Too busy gardening now to write books. But I had the richest of rich childhoods when I think of that time. My granddad was a coal miner eventually, so there was never any lack of coal in the house. And as a result of that, we very often, or my nana very often, cooked for other people who didn't have coal. You know, there'd be pots being given to her to put on the hob, as it were. And she looked after a woman, Mrs. Reynolds, upstairs, who had 3 children. And now, of course, I know, but didn't at the time, maybe she didn't either. Mrs. Reynolds had TB. And of course, my nana picked up TB from her. Maybe she already had it then. I don't know. Certainly this persistent cough is what I remember of her. Certainly there came a point when I wasn't allowed to sleep at night in the house, and that led to its own stories as well. But because of her service to that woman and her children, all of whom were older than me, but they were my sort of friends that I grew up with, the Reynolds children, my nana paid that very human price of looking after each other, and died now when I think of it. I'm 77 at the end of this month. My nana wasn't quite 60. In my head, of course, she's still an old woman, much older than me and always will be. And the last few years of her life, certainly from, I was 13 when she died, and all of my memories of her after that was of someone who was basically bedridden and landed up in sanatorium for a while. East Fortune, where the Concorde, the things that are in my head, Maggie, the Concorde is now housed on East Fortune, which used to be a sanatorium. And I was intrigued. In fact, I spent my 10th birthday out there as a treat. I was taken out, and I can still see the fields of wheat or oats on the way on the bus. Big treat going out to East Fortune on the top of a bus. And realising that she slept outside under a veranda thing, but that was the cure. Lots of fresh air and good food. And again, my 10th birthday is something which was just magical because I spent in a sanatorium with my nana. And so I honour that woman. I honour the woman of that time. I remember when the National Health Service came in. I was 1948, and so I'd be 5 years old at that time. And I remember the jubilation that they didn't have to choose between medication, either for my nana or for a cough or for my granddad's skin condition. He had a horrible scalp condition. They could actually buy a wee bit of lamb that week or something, you know, that wasn't pig's trotters or offal. And there's been generations of us now since 1948 that in many ways have taken that for granted. And the last few months have made us realise just what a valuable asset it is and how very, very vulnerable it is under this present regime. I have no doubts at all that it's part and parcel of the agreement with what's happening over the pond. I'll stop now before I get into the politics of it. Otherwise, the Glasgow Granny's going to come out. And she's always in the background anyway. She gives me permission to swear. I was brought up in Edinburgh and Morningside, and the Morningside matriarch doesn't swear, you know, but the Glasgow Granny fucking well does. So I shall take you a wee walk round my lovely... Oh, let me do it this way. No, I don't know how to do that, so I'll just do it this way. And what I'm planning to do today is to make a wee memorial thing for my Nana, which I'll start on now and I'll let you see it later. But my Nana had many children and grandchildren. This is one of hers. This is her first great-great-grandchild. It's Emma's little garden. And of course this lovely wee grotto corner here is Gwen's. And I'd love her to have met them and know that that very strong female line that she started continues to give service, continues to keep the door open, continues to welcome in the stranger, to make a friend. And with Flora down there, and with Lena up here, the garden of Maggie and her friends. I shall bid you a farewell, honouring Emily Firth Kelly, who gave birth to my mother 100 years ago tomorrow. Bye for now.